Meet the Tiger, by Leslie Charteris, the first Saint novel. Chapter 7. The Fun Continues. It was only a moment before Khan opened the door. Simon could have fallen on the detective's neck when he saw that Khan's features registered nothing more than a faint surprise, but he concealed his joy and assumed the slightly mocking smile that went with his saintly pose. "Thought I'd find you up," murmured the saint. "Mind if I split a small lemonade with you?" He had sidled past Khan into the miniature hall before the detective could answer, and Khan closed the front door resignedly. "I didn't expect to be honored again so soon, Mr. Templar," said the detective. "As a matter of fact, I've a visitor with me." The last sentence was uttered in a tone that was intended to convey a gentle hint, as man of the world to man of the world, that the saint should pause and consult his host before making himself at home, but the saint had opened the door of the study before the detective had finished speaking. "Why, it's Miss Home!" exclaimed the saint. "Fancy meeting you!" He turned to Khan, who was reddening silently on the threshold. "I hope I'm not interrupting a consultation, Doc? Throw me out of the window if I cramp your style, won't you? I mean, people never stand on ceremony with me." "As a matter of fact," said Khan on the defensive, "Miss Holmes simply came round for a chat." "No? Really?" said the saint. "Yes," returned Khan loudly. "Well, well," said Simon, who was enjoying himself hugely. "And how are we, Miss Holmes?" He was wondering just how much she had told Khan, and she read the unspoken question in his eyes and answered it. "In another minute, I shall get my face smacked." The saint took her up swiftly. "And quite right, too. Try to forgive me. I never could see an elastic leg without being irresistibly impelled to find out how far it would stretch." He cast a reproachful glance at Khan, which made the detective take on an even deeper purple hue. Then he was smiling at Patricia with a message that was not for broadcasting. It showed his complete satisfaction with the way things had fallen out. There must have been a difference of a couple of minutes between their watches, and those 2 minutes had been just long enough to save the beans from being spilt all over the place. And the smile added, "Well played, kid. I knew I could rely on you, and everything in the garden's lovely. Which means, incidentally, that it's our job to lead Khan up the garden. Watch your step." And the girl smiled back, to show that she understood, but there was rather more in her smile than that. It showed that she was very glad to see him again, and the saint had a struggle to stop himself grabbing her up in his arms and kissing her on the strength of it. "You seem to have been in the wars, Mr. Templar," remarked Khan, and the saint nodded tolerantly. "Didn't Miss Home tell you?" "I didn't feel I could ask her." The saint raised his eyebrows, for although the girl had made some effort to tidy herself, it was still glaringly evident that she had not spent the evening playing dominoes in the drawing-room. Khan explained, "When I opened the door and saw her, I thought something had happened and she was coming to me for a first aid. But she said it was only for a chat, so I overcame my professional instincts and said nothing. I rather think you were leading up to something when Mr. Templar came in, weren't you, Miss Home?" "I see that you were. But as a Khan caught the saint's accusing eye for the 3rd time and spluttered. "As a doctor," said Khan defiantly, "I was trained to let my patients make the running. The old school, but a good one. And then you arrive." The detective broke off with a gesture that comprehended Patricia's ragamuffin appearance and the saint's own tattered clothes, and Simon grinned. "So sad," he drawled. "And now I suppose you'll be in agonies of curiosity for weeks." Khan shrugged. "That depends." The detective was a passably good actor, but he was heavily handicapped by the suggestion of malicious glee that lurked in the saint's twinkling eyes, and he dared not seem to notice that the saint was quietly laughing at him, because it was essential for him to maintain the role of Dr. Khan in the presence of a witness. Which goes some way to explain why his florid face remained more rubicund even than it normally was, and why there was a certain unnatural restraint in his voice. Patricia was perplexed. She had expected to find that the saint and Khan were familiar friends. Instead, she found 2 men fencing with innuendo. It was beyond her to follow the subtleties of the duel, but there was no doubt that Simon was quite happy and Khan was quite annoyed, for it was indisputably the saint's game. "Shall I tell you all about it, Doc?" asked the saint insinuatingly, for it was a weakness of his to exaggerate his pose to the borders of farce. "Do," urged Khan in an unguarded moment. "I'll tell you," said Simon confidentially. "It was like this." Khan drew nearer. The saint frowned, blinked, scratched his head, and stared blankly at the detective. "Do you know," said Simon, in simulated dismay, "it's a most extraordinary thing I can't remember. Isn't that funny?" The detective was understood to reply that he was not amused. He said other things in a low voice that was none the less pregnant with emotion, for the saint's ears alone, and Simon turned away with a pained expression. "I don't agree," said Simon. "The 10-toed tripopper is nothing like the wall-eyed giraffe. Try Keating's." "As a matter of fact," interposed Patricia, who felt that things looked like getting out of hand, "Mr. Templar's been with me most of the evening. We were taking a walk along by the cliff and—" Simon raised his hand. "Hush," he said. "Not before the doc. You'll be putting ideas into his head." "Grr," said Khan fiercely, which a man might well say when goaded to the limits of human endurance, and then he coughed energetically to cover it up. "You see," said the saint, "you're embarrassing him." Simon was perfect. His smiling, polished ease made Khan's red-faced discomfort look like an intentional effort of the detective to entertain a children's party with a few faces between the ice creams and the Punch and Judy, and Patricia was weak with suppressed laughter. It was unpardonable, of course, but it was the only way to dispose of Khan's burning curiosity. To have been secretive and mysterious, much as the saint would have loved playing the part, would have been fatal. Khan suddenly realized that he was being futile, that the elasticity of his leg was being sorely tried. The saint had been watching for that, and instantly he became genuinely apologetic. "Perhaps I ragged you a bit too much," he hastened to confess. "Really, though, you were asking for it, by being so infernally suspicious, almost as if you suspected me of just having murdered somebody, or robbing the till of the village post office. It's really quite simple. Miss Holm and I were walking along the cliffs and—" "I fell over," Patricia explained, jumping in as soon as the saint hesitated. "I landed on a ledge, and I wasn't seriously hurt, but Mr. Templar had an awful job getting me back." Khan frowned. He had been badly had. The saint's merciless leg-pulling had achieved its object. So masterly was the transition from teasing to sober seriousness that the seriousness went unquestioned, and Khan swallowed whole a story that he would certainly have disbelieved if it had been told him in the first place without any nonsense. "No offense, old thing," pleaded the saint contritely. "I couldn't miss such a marvelous opportunity to make you imagine the worst." Khan looked from one to the other, but Patricia, pulling her weight and more also, met the detective's searching stare unabashed, and the saint's face displayed exactly what the saint wanted it to display. "I tried to tell you once," Patricia pointed out. "Only Mr. Templar interrupted." Simon flashed her a boatload of appreciation in a glance. "Ye gods, what a girl! There wasn't an actress in the world who could have taught her anything about the kind of acting that gets over without any stage effects. She had every woman in every Secret Service in Europe skinned a mile. There she was, cool as you please, playing up to her cue like an old hand. And marvel of marvels, asking no questions. The saint hadn't the foggiest notion why a girl he'd only known a couple of days should back him up like that, when every flag on the mast would have told any ordinary person that the saint was more likely to be wrong than not. Ordinary respectable people did not go in for the hobbies that she had seen the saint indulging in, like bending statuettes over millionaire knights' skulls after walking mysteriously out of the night through their library windows, or being chased round gardens by men and bloodhounds, or chucking their lady friends over 8-foot walls. And yet she trusted him implicitly, took her line from him and postponed the questions till afterwards. And not the least remarkable fact was that the saint, that consummate egotist, never thought of the obvious explanation. Khan reddened again, recovered his normal colour, and his stolid features gradually lost their strained appearance and relaxed into a wry smile. "You certainly did try to save me, Miss Holm," he admitted. "You see, the saint, that is, Mr. Templar, he's always running into trouble, and seeing him like that I couldn't help thinking of his habits. It didn't occur to me that you were with him. I was so dense it didn't strike me that you might have got mussed up at the same time as he did, and, of course, I know all about you, Miss Holmes, so—" "Half-time," begged the saint dazedly. "We're getting all tied up. Let's call it quits." Khan nodded. "Saint," he said, "it wasn't fair. I'm taking this game seriously, and that's quite bad enough without tangling it any more." "That'll be all right," said the saint heartily. "And now what about that baby Polly we were going to split?" Khan busied himself with decanter and glasses, and the saint offered up a short prayer of thanksgiving. That was a nasty corner taken on 2 wheels in the devil of a skid, but they were round it somehow with the old bus still right side up, and the road looked pretty clear at least as far as the next bend. Simon caught the girl's eye while Khan's back was turned. She smiled and shrugged her shoulders helplessly. The saint grinned back and spread out his hands. Then, quite shamelessly, he blew her a kiss. Khan brought the drinks and the saint raised his glass. "Bung-ho, troops," he said. "Here's to a good race, Khan." The detective looked back. "Reasonably good hunting, Saint," he replied grimly, and Simon grinned and drank. "All things considered, worthy chirurgeon, I think." The saint broke off at the sound of a thunderous knocking on the front door. Then a bell pealed long and insistently at the back of the house, and the knocking was resumed. Simon set down his glass carefully. "You're popular tonight, son," he murmured. "Someone in a tearing hurry, too. Birth or death? What's the betting?" "Hanged if I know," said Khan, and went out. The saint crossed the room swiftly and opened the casement windows wide, as an elementary precaution. Apparently the evening's party was not yet over. He had not the vaguest idea what the next move was going to be, but the air tingled with an electric foreboding that something was about to happen. The girl looked at him inquiringly. He dared not speak, but he signed to her to keep her end up and go on trusting him. Outside, a voice which the saint did not know was asking if Mr. Templar was there, and Khan answered. There was a tramp of heavy feet, and somebody arrived in the doorway. Simon was leaning on the mantelpiece, looking the other way, a study in disinterested innocence. "Ho," said the voice. "There he is." The saint looked up. A man in uniform had entered, and the symptoms pointed to his being the village constable. Simon had not even realized that such an official existed in Bakem, but that was undoubtedly what the gentleman with the pink face and the ill-fitting uniform was. The constable had clearly been dragged out of bed and rushed into his uniform. He was dishevelled, and his tunic was buttoned lopsidedly. All these details the saint observed in a slow, surprised once-over. Then the policeman advanced importantly and clapped a hand on Simon's shoulder. "I am Constable George Hopkins," he said, "and if the doctor will excuse me, I shall arrest you on a charge of burglary and assault." "Smoke?" said the saint to himself. That was a move. Simon seemed astonished and rather annoyed, as if he were wondering how the mistake had been made, and was quite satisfied that it would be cleared up in a moment. But beneath his outward poise his mind was working at breakneck speed. The counter-attack and the rapidity with which it had been launched were worthy of the tiger, but it was fighting over very thin ice. "My good man, you're dippy," said the saint languidly. "Who makes this charge anyway?" "I do." It was Bloom. Bloom with his leathery face perfectly composed and just the ghost of a light of triumph in his slitted eyes betraying him. Bloom, walking past Khan into the room with just the right shade of deference and just the right suggestion of regret for having to make a scene, but quite firmly the law-abiding citizen determined to do his duty and bring the criminal to justice. "1,000 pardons, Doctor." Bloom bowed to Khan and then turned and bowed to the girl. "I am deeply sorry, Miss Holmes, that I should be compelled to do this in your presence. Perhaps you would like to retire for a minute." Patricia tossed her head. "Thanks, I'll stay," she said. "I'm sure there's a mistake, and perhaps I can help. I've been with Mr. Templar most of the evening." Bloom's eyes rested long and significantly on the girl's torn frock and scratched arms, but she met his gaze boldly, and at last he turned away with a lift of shoulder and eyebrow. "I'll explain," he said. "I was reading in my study shortly after 11 this evening, when this man walked in. He threatened me with a revolver, making some remark which I did not understand. I am not a young man, but I have led a hard life, and I did not hesitate to grapple with him. He is very strong, however, and he managed to hit me with the butt of the revolver. I remember nothing more until the time when I came to and found him rifling my desk. Since he was armed and had already beaten me once in a hand-to-hand tussle, I pretended to be still unconscious. He searched the room minutely, but apparently failed to find whatever it was he was looking for. When he left, I followed him and traced him here. Then I went and fetched Hopkins. That is the complete story." "And you better come along quietly," advised the policeman, tightening his grip on the saint's shoulder and holding his truncheon at the ready. "Fine," said the saint softly. "I should like to be searched now so that your statement about the revolver can be verified." Bloom smiled. "You left it behind," he said. "Here it is." Khan took the weapon from Bloom's hand and examined it. "Belgian make," he said. "Is this yours, Mr. Templar?" "It is not," answered Simon promptly. "I object to firearms on principle. They make such a noise." "Come along," urged the constable, jerking the saint forward. Simon was not easily peeved, but one thing that made him see red was anybody trying to haze him. For a second he forgot his saintly pose. He caught the policeman's wrist with both hands and twisted like an eel. There was a flurry of arms and legs, a yell, and George Hopkins landed with a crash on the other side of the room, with most of the breath knocked out of him. The saint straightened his tie and looked bang into the muzzle of an automatic in Bloom's hand, but that he ignored. "Anyone who wants a quiet life is advised to keep their filthy hands off me," murmured the saint. "Don't do it again, son." The constable was getting shakily to his feet. "That's assaulting the police," he stormed. "Oh, don't be childish," drawled the saint, cool again. "When we want your little chatter, we'll ask for it. Just now, Bloom, we'll argue this out by ourselves. We can soon smash this cock and bull yarn of yours. 1. Were you alone in the house?" "I was?" "Where was Algy?" "He'd gone over to see Miss Hom." That knocked the bottom out of a neat little alibi that the saint had thought of trying to put over, but he did not show his disappointment. 2. Didn't anyone follow me here with you?" "I refuse to be cross-examined. I've told you I was alone." "You're talking," said the saint coldly. "Don't. Be a good boy and just answer when you're spoken to. And the point is, if you've been quite alone all this time, as you say you have, what's your word against mine? Suppose I say I called in for a chat, and you stuck me up with that gun and tried to pinch my watch. Why shouldn't you be running yourself?" "Let him tell that to the judge," growled the constable. "I think," said Bloom acidly, "that my reputation will survive your wild accusations." The saint was not impressed. "We had a stand-up fight, did we?" he went on. "I grant you I look as if I'd been in some rough stuff. Now suppose you take off that Mac and let's see how you came out of it." Bloem smiled, a little wearily, and unbuttoned his coat. The saint's lips tightened. Bloem certainly had a convincing air of having been violently handled, and that put the tiger another point to the good. Simon saw the tiger's score soaring skywards at an alarming rate, but the only effect of that was to key up his own nerves, while his easy and confident manner never faltered. There was still a few more minutes to play. "It's rather hopeless, isn't it?" said Bloom. He was appealing to the audience, and the constable grunted his agreement. "What was this remark you didn't understand?" asked Khan, "when he, as you say, threatened you with the revolver?" "It was most mysterious," said Bloom. "He said, 'I'm looking for the tiger's den and I think I'm getting warm.' I still can't make out what he meant." Simon fished out his cigarette case and began to tap a cigarette thoughtfully on his thumbnail. Apparently bored with the whole proceeding, he nevertheless saw Khan's face become a mask. Out of the corner of his eye he caught sight of Bloom, and the Boer's bland demeanour almost took his breath away. The colossal audacity of that last statement was the crowning stroke to a truly masterly bluff. The saint wondered if Khan himself was suspect, but Bloom's gaze rested only on the saint. No, the gang knew nothing about Khan's real profession. Bloom was simply taking a vindictive pleasure in kicking the man whom he thought he had got where he wanted him. And it looked dangerously as if he had got the saint tied hand and foot and gagged. Patricia could not help him, and Khan could not even if he cared to. It was Bloom's word against Simon's, and there was no doubt which the bench would prefer to accept. And Bloom knew that the saint knew that any reference to the evening's entertainment at Bittle's would be futile. Bittle would lie like a Trojan, and the tiger was sure to have provided him with a plausible explanation of the noise that had occurred earlier that night. The saint grasped the consummate efficiency of the tiger's tactics. Simon was to be shopped, and the shopping had been slickly done. He would be lucky to get away with 6 months hard, and taken in conjunction with the assault upon the police in the execution of its duty, the whole charge sheet might well put the saint behind bars for upwards of a year. And in that time T.T. Deeps could be salted, and the tiger cubs could fade gracefully away. The saint lounged even more languidly against the mantelpiece. This last deal had certainly given the tiger one Hades of a hand. Yet indisputably the saint dominated the situation. They were all waiting for him. Bloom, watching him through narrowed lids, and still training the automatic upon him, was utterly confident of the strength of his combination. He was just waiting for the saint to confess defeat. The constable, more wary after his taste of the saint's anger, was hanging about in the background waiting for somebody else to start the next dance. Patricia was looking anxiously at the saint, powerless to help him, and wondering if any daring side-slip was being planned behind that lazy exterior. The one certain thing was that she did not believe Bloom's story for an instant. At any other time she might have credited it, but seen in the light of previous events that evening it savoured of nothing but the complicated web of mystery which had caught her up in its meshes and which threatened her saint with the most sinister things. And Khan had nothing to say. As far as Bloom's story was concerned, it might or might not be true. His knowledge of the saint inclined him to believe it. But in any case the saint was working against him, even if he was also working against the tiger. And to have disclosed himself as Central Detective Inspector Khan of Scotland Yard would have written Finnis to every chance he had of succeeding on his mission. "We're waiting," said Bloom at last. "So I see," drawled Simon. "If you can wait a bit longer, there are just 1 or 2 more points to clear up. The first is that I'm sure you won't mind the doctor just examining the bump I must have raised on your cranium when I knocked you out." He was watching Bloom closely as he spoke, and his heart sank when he saw that the man was not at all put out. Khan walked up to Bloom with a query, and Bloom nodded. "Just behind my left ear," he said. "Sweetest lamb," said the saint through his teeth. "I'll bet you just hated getting that bit of realism." Khan looked at the saint and shrugged. "Someone certainly hit him very hard," he said. "Saint, you've put your foot in it this time. So, I don't think we'll prolong this unpleasant duty," said Bloom briskly. "Constable, you have the handcuffs? I'm covering him, and I shall shoot if he attacks you again." And then the congregation was increased by 1, for a man strutted out of the darkness and stood framed in the open window. Wassel this?" demanded Orris truculently. Chapter 8. The Saint is Dense. Bloom wheeled with a smothered exclamation, for the interruption came from behind him. Then the Boer slowly lowered his automatic because Orris was carrying the enormous revolver which was his pride and joy, and that fearsome weapon was waving in a gentle semicircle so that it covered everyone in the room in turn. Orris leaned on the window-sill, well pleased with the timeliness of his entrance and the sensation it had caused. "Snowed up," declared Orris brightly. "He just come in the nick of time. Looks like a dangerous character, too." "Officer," said Horace, with a lordly sweep of his free hand, "you have the bracelets. Do your duty." "My good fellow," Orris waggled the blunderbuss threateningly in Bloom's direction. "Lay off me good feller in me," commanded Horace ferociously. "Caught in the yak, that's what you are, and you can't wriggle out of it. Constable, what the thunder and hell are you whying for? Look slippy and clap the jewelry on him. And you just hurry up and lego that popgun, or I'll plug her." Bloom let the automatic fall, and the saint picked it up in case of accidents. "I can explain," persisted Bloom. "'Course you can. agreed Orris, scornful. "Never knew a crook who couldn't." "Oh, but he can," said the saint. "You can stop flourishing that cannon, Orris, and come right in. I was just wondering how to get hold of you." Orris looked doubtful, but eventually he obeyed, clambering lamely over the sill and treating Bloom to a menacing glare as he did so. "Yes, sir?" "A simple case of mistaken identity," remarked the saint to the assembled company, in the manner of counsel opening the defense. But Mr. Bloom was so very obstinate. "Well, this is Orris, late of His Majesty's Royal Marines, and my servant for years. Orris will now testify that I reached home just after 11, and didn't leave again until about 20 to 12. The saint did not even look at Orris as he spoke, for he knew his man. Khan, however, did, and saw Orris register surprise. "Tha's so," said Orris. "Who said you didn't?" "You see," Simon explained, "Mr. Bloom there was held up by an armed man tonight, and he had the idea that it was me, so he's been trying to arrest me." Orris nodded, tilting his head away from Bloom, as if the man offended his nostrils. "Ah," said Orris derisively, "the idea." The saint turned to Bloom. "Perhaps you will now apologize," he suggested. "Come, Mr. Bloom, admit that you didn't get a good view of your assailant, and for reasons of your own you jumped to the conclusion that it was me. He might even have been masked." The two men's eyes met. There was no misconstruing the saint's meaning. He was offering Bloom a graceful retreat. Bloom knew that he had weakened his case by confessing that no one but himself had seen the bandit, and his story would never hold water in the face of Simon's alibi. Orris was the one factor which the tiger, by some incomprehensible oversight, had utterly overlooked. It might even be said that only Orris's arrival at that precise moment made him a factor to be considered. If any time had elapsed between the arrest and its coming to Orris's ears, Orris might by then have been trapped into admitting that he had not seen the saint since dinner, and possibly the tiger had banked on some such maneuver. But Orris had turned up just when he was wanted, which he had an uncanny gift for doing, and thereby he had upset the tiger's apple cart irretrievably. And Bloom knew it. He did not show it with a muscle of his face, but his eyes glowed venomously, and the saint, smiling a little, gazed back with a little blue devil of unholy glee dancing about just behind his lazily lowered lids. For the saint was thinking of the whack behind the ear which Bloom had suffered for the good of the cause, and that thought made his ribs ache with noiseless laughter. "I am deeply humiliated," said Bloom in a strangled voice. As a matter of fact, the man was masked. I let him leave the room, and then followed. When I came out of the garden, I saw Mr. Templar walking away, and immediately concluded that it was he. The real man must have gone off in another direction. I apologize. "I accept your apology, Mr. Bloom," said the saint stiffly. "Don't let it occur again." His dignity was terrific, and for that shrewd cut he was rewarded with a look from Bloom which ought by rights to have made him vanish in a puff of smoke, leaving a small greasy stain on the carpet, but the saint's armor was impregnable. "I'm very sorry, Doctor," said Bloom unevenly. "Try to forgive me, Miss Holm. I'd better go." The saint stepped up with the automatic. "You might need this with a hold-up man in the neighborhood," he murmured mockingly. "If you meet him again, I trust you will not spare the lead." Bloom gazed back malignantly. "You need have no fear of that, Mr. Templar," he replied. He was just going out when Mr. Hopkins awoke to the realization that he had been cheated of the glory of arresting an armed desperado, and that this coolly smiling man who was getting off scot-free had flung him across the room, bruised and shaken him severely and nearly broken his arm. "Here," said the constable, whose idiom was much the same as that of Orris. "Iwassel this. Whatever you say, that don't dispose of the charge of assault in the police." "When an innocent man is treated like a criminal," said Simon virtuously, "he may be pardoned for losing his temper. I'm sure Mr. Bloom will agree with me. In fact," added the saint, taking Mr. Hopkins coaxingly by the arm, "I'm sure that if you mentioned the matter to Mr. Bloom, he'd stand you a glass of milk and put a penny in your money-box." Wouldn't you, Mr. Bloom?" "Naturally," said Bloom without enthusiasm. "Naturally, I must accept the responsibility for that." "Spoken like a gent," approved the saint. "Now toddle along and talk big business under the stars, like good children." And he urged Bloom and the constable towards the door. They went obediently for different reasons. It was a victory that the saint could not help rubbing in. He slammed the front door on the pair, and returned hilariously. "Honor is vindicated, mes enfantes," he said happily. "What about splitting another lemonade on it, Khan?" The detective looked at the saint and nodded slowly. "I think we might," he assented. "Such luck ought to be celebrated. I suppose it would be indiscreet to ask how Oris came to arrive so fortunately." "But why indiscreet?" cried the saint. "All's fair and above board. Oris, tell the gentleman how you happened to blow in on your cue." Oris cleared his throat. "Being accustomed to take a constitutional," he began in the stilted language which he would have employed before his orderly officer, "I'm in the habit of walking this way of an evening, and the winder being open and me having good eyesight." "Of course I believe you," said Khan. "You deserve to be believed. There's some whiskey in the kitchen, Oris." Oris saluted and marched out, and the saint doubled up with silent mirth. "Oris is unique," he said. "Oris is all that, and then some." Khan returned ruefully. Soon afterwards Simon and Patricia left. They walked the short distance to the manor without speaking, for the saint was enjoying the novel experience of finding his flow of small talk entirely dried up. He had thought of nothing to say until the girl was opening the door, and then he could only make a postponement. "May I see you tomorrow morning?" he asked. "Of course. I'll come right after breakfast." Suddenly she remembered Agatha Girton. "I think would you mind if I came over to you instead? I'd love you to. And if I haven't bored you to tears by then, you can stay for lunch. Tell me what time you'll be leaving and I'll send Oris over to fetch you." She was surprised. "Is that necessary?" "Very necessary," replied the saint gravely. "Tigers have nasty, suspicious minds, just like me. And by this time one tiger is wondering just how dangerous you are, Pat. Yes, I know it's screamingly funny, but let me send Oris for my own peace of mind." "Well, about 10:30, if you like." "I do, and Oris will adore it. One other thing. Will you do me a great favor?" She had found the switch in the hall, and she turned on the light to see his face better, but he was not joking. "Lock your door, and put the key under the pillow. Don't open to anybody, not even your aunt. I don't really think anything'll happen so soon, but tigers can hustle. Will you?" She nodded. "You're very alarming," she said. "I'm full of ideas tonight," he said. "I've had a taste of the tiger's speed, and nobody ever stung the saint in the same way twice. Don't believe any messages except they're brought by Oras. Don't trust anybody but me, Oras, or old Khan at a pinch. I know it's a tall order, but there are 1 or 2 rough days, not to mention rough nights in store for the old brigade. You've been perfectly marvelous so far. Can you keep it up?" "I'll try," she said. He took her hand. "God bless you, Pat, old pal. Saint." He was going when she stopped him. It was odd to hear that nickname fall from her lips, the name wherewith the saint had been christened in strange and ugly places by hard and godless men. He had grown so used to it that he had come to accept it without question, but now the sound of it brought a flood of memories. Once again he stood in the bosun's smoky bar at the back of Mexico City, looking from the huddled corpse of Senhor Miguel Graciento to the girl called Cherry, and heard the rurales pounding on the door. He had got her away, on an English tramp bound for Liverpool. "Saint?" she had said. That was a true word spoken in jest, and he had never heard the name uttered in the same tone since until that moment. "Saint, did you really go to Bloom's?" "I did not," he answered. "That was a frame-up. But Minia Bloom is certainly one of the tiger cubs." "Watch him!" "I'll tell you the whole yarn tomorrow. Bye-bye, kid." The saint found Oris in the lane, curled up under the hedge, philosophically smoking his pipe. "We'll work inland round the village," said Simon. "I'm hoping the tigers had enough for one night, but you never know." Nobody's got any proof that Bloom was lying about that hold-up merchant, except me, and a fairy tale like that cuts both ways. If our bodies were found in a field in the morning, the whole thing'd fit in beautifully. Nevertheless, they were not molested on the way back, a fact which might well have been due to the saint's foresight. It took an hour of the saint's killing pace to do the journey, which would have lasted only 15 minutes by the obvious route, and even then Simon was not satisfied. When the outline of the pillbox loomed dimly up against the dark sky, he stopped. "Booby traps have caught mugs before now," he murmured. "Just park yourself in the nettles here, Horace, while I snoop round." The saint could have given most shikars points when it came to moving across country without being noticed. Horace simply saw a tall shape melt soundlessly away into the gloom, and thereafter could trace nothing until the tall shape materialized again beside him. "All clear," said Simon. "That means our tiger's burning the midnight oil, thinking out something really slick and deadly." The saint was right. Although he and Horace never relaxed their vigilance, taking it in turns to sleep and keep watch, they were left in peace. The tiger had taken one blind shot, and it had not come off. Moreover, if his organization had been only a shade less thorough, it might have landed him in the tureen. As it was, he had come out of the encounter none too well, and for the future he intended to have his moves mapped out well in advance, with every possible setback and development legislated for. None of these reflections disturbed the saint's sleep. He had taken the first watch, and so the sun was shining gaily through the embrasures when he awoke for the second time, to find Horace setting a cup of tea down by his bedside. "Nice morning," remarked Horace, according to ritual, and vanished again. Since the episode of the bullet out of the blue, Simon had reluctantly decided to forego his morning dip until the air had become clearer. However, he skipped and shadow-boxed in the sun with a special vigor, and finished up with a race, splashing a couple of buckets of water over him, what time the saint lay on the grass drawing deep, grateful breaths and blessing his perfect condition. For the saint saw a fierce and wearing scrap ahead, and he reckoned that he would need all his strength and stamina if he was going to be on his feet when the gong clanged for the last round. "Breakfast half a minute," said Horace. The saint was grinning as he dressed. Horace was nearly too good to be true. They were late that morning, and Horace left to fetch Patricia as soon as he had served breakfast. The girl arrived in half an hour, to find the saint spread-eagled in a deck chair outside the pillbox. He had managed to unearth another pair of flannel bags and another shooting jacket that were nearly as disreputable as the outfit which had been wrecked in Bittle's garden the night before, and he looked very fresh and comfortable, for his shirt as usual would have put Snow to shame. He jumped up and held out both his hands, and she gave him both of hers. "I haven't seen you for ages," he said. "How are we?" "Fine," she told him. "And nothing happened." She was cool and slim in white, and he thought he had never seen anyone half so lovely. "Something might have," he said. He rigged a chair for her and adjusted the cushions, and then he sat down again. "I know you're bursting with curiosity," he said, "so I'll come straight to the osses." And without further ado he started on the long history. He told her about Fernando dying out in the jungle with a tiger cub's kriss in him, and he told her Fernando's story. He told her about the tiger who was for years Chicago's most brilliant and terrible gang leader. He told her about some of the tiger's exploits, and finally came to the account of the breaking of the Confederate Bank. Some of the details Fernando had told him. The rest he had gathered together by patient investigation. The accumulation worked up into a plot, hair-raising enough to provide the basis of the wildest film serial that was ever made. "The tiger's very nearly a genius," he said. "The way he got away with that mint of money and carted it all the miles to here is just a sample of his brain." Then he told her about the more recent events, the little he had learned while he had been in Bacon. How he had been suspected from the day of his arrival, and how he had done his best to encourage that suspicion, in the hope that the other side would give themselves away by trying to dispose of him. Gradually the lie of the land took shape in her mind while the saint talked on, putting in a touch of character here and there, recalling points that he had omitted and referring to details that he had not yet given. The story was not told smoothly. It rattled out, paused, and rattled on again, decorated with the saint's typical racy idiom and humorous egotism. Nevertheless, it held her, and it was a convincing story, for the saint had a gift for graphic description. She saw the scenes at which she had been present in a new light. He ended up with a flippant account of the sport-shea beetle after he had helped her get away. And there you have it, he concluded. Heard in cold blood, with the sun shining and all that, it sounds preposterous enough to make dear old Munchausen look like gospel. But you've seen a bit of it yourself, and perhaps that'll make it easier for you to believe the rest. And what it boils down to is that the tiger is in Bacon, and so am I, and so are the pieces of 8, and the tiger wants my head on a tin tray, and I want his ill-gotten gains, and we're both pretty keen to hang on to our respective possessions. So, taken by and large, it looks like we shall come to blows and other wild and woolly Western expressions of mutual ill-feeling. And the point is, Pat, and the reason why I felt you had a right to know all the odds is that you've gone and cut in on the game. By last night the tiger had to face the risk that I might have talked to you, and the way you behave generally won't have eased his mind any. You might be a danger or you might not, but he can't afford to take chances. To be on the safe side, he's got to assume that you and I are as thick as thieves. So you see, old soul, you're slap in the middle of this here jamboree, whether you like it or not. You're cast for second juvenile lead in the blood-curdling melodrama now playing, and your name's up in red lights all round the tiger's den, and the question before the house is, what do we do about it? He was leaning forward so that he could see her face, and she knew that he was desperately serious. She knew also instinctively that he was not a man to exaggerate the situation, however much he might play the buffoon in other directions. "Now, here's my suggestion," said the saint. "I know a bloke called Terry Mannering, who lives on the other side of Devonshire, and he can deal with fun and games as well as I can. He has a wife whom you'll love, and a very good line in yachts, being nearly as rich as I should like to be since his old man kicked the bucket. If I took you over and told Terry that it'd be good for all your healths if you went cruising off to the West Indies or somewhere else a long way off for a few months, till the tumult and the shouting dies, so to speak, and the tigers and their cubs depart, well, I know the 3 of you'd be on the high seas in no time. And the tiger and I would be rude to each other for a bit, and when it was all over and he was decently buried, I'd let you know and you could come back. What about it?" Patricia studied her shoe, and she said, in a very saintly way, "What, indeed?" "You said, rapped Simon. What about it?" queried Patricia. "It might be rather a good idea some time, but you can't rush it like that. Besides, I'm rather enjoying myself in Bacon." Simon got up. "Well, I'm not enjoying your enjoyment," he said bluntly. "That sort of courage is all very fine when it's to some purpose, but this time it isn't. I've never dragged a woman into my little worries yet, and I'm not starting now." "Perhaps you think this is going to be a picnic. I thought I'd made it plain enough that it isn't. If you want to pack a few thrills into your young life, I'll arrange a big-game shooting trip, or something else comparatively tame, later. But this particular spree is not in your line one bit, and you'd better be sensible and admit it." Patricia raised her eyebrows. "So I gather you propose to kidnap me," she said calmly. "I believe Shanghai is the word. Well, I should start planning right away, because nothing short of that is going to move me." "You're a damned fool," said the saint. She laughed, standing up to him and laying a hand on his shoulder. "Dear man," she said, "I refuse to lose my temper, because I know that's just what you want me to do. You think that if you're rude enough I'll dash off and leave you to stew, and I can promise you I shan't do anything of the sort. I know it isn't going to be a picnic, but I'm sorry if you think I'm a girl that's only fit for picnics. I've always fancied myself as the heroine of a hell-for-leather adventure, and this is probably the only chance I shall ever have, and I'm jolly well going to see it through." Simon held himself in check with an effort. He had a frantic impulse to take this stubborn slip of a girl across his knee and spank some sense into her, and coincidentally with that he had an equally importunate desire to hug her and kiss her to death. For there was no doubt that she was determined to ride on to the kill, however dangerous the country her obstinate intention led her over. Why she should be so set on it beat the saint. He could imagine a high-spirited girl fancying herself as the heroine of just such an adventure, but he had never dreamed of meeting a girl who'd go on fancying herself quite so keenly when it came to the point, and when she'd had a peek at some of the stern and spiky disadvantages. But there she was, smiling into his eyes, tranquilly announcing her resolution to see the shooting match through with him, and boldly averring that she was perfectly prepared to eat the whole cake as well as the icing. She was going to be the blazes of a nuisance and the mischief of a worry to him. "But hell!" swore the saint to himself. "I'm darn glad of it," wherein he betrayed his egotism. It would be a grueling test for her, but he'd have her with him all the time, and if she came through it with flying colours, well, maybe after all he'd go the way of most confirmed bachelors. And since he saw that neither cajoling nor cursing would budge her, he accepted the situation like a wise man. And even then, with such an inferiority complex as love, afflicted the sublime egotist, did not spot the foundation of her determination, though it stuck out a mile. Nevertheless, in his blindness, he was very near to blundering straight into the heart of the affair. His scowl relaxed, and he took her hand from his shoulder and held it. "I've known some fool women," said the saint, "but I never met one whose foolishness appealed to me more than yours." "Then it's a bet?" she asked. He nodded. "You said it, partner. And the Lord grant we win. It's not my fault if you insist on jazzing into the tiger's den, but it'll be my unforgivable fault if I don't yank you out again safely. Shake." "Bless you," said Patricia softly.